Ripavilla. I'll take a second to introduce Josh Hughes, who's the project manager heading up the team, but also want to recognize we've got Casey Williams, who's the park recreation director for the city. I saw, look like Victor Lay, who's our city administrator, my boss, who's on the conference tonight as well. But we want to take a second just to welcome everybody to the second in a series of town hall public meetings that we've been having on this project. We have retained the services of Tuck Hinton, who has an exceptional cast of sub-consultants that are part of the master plan process. And this evening they'll be sharing with us some updated plan materials that they've been working through, and also give us a feel for what to expect as we continue to move through the master planning process. So Josh, we'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to go ahead and ask it. I'll go ahead and mute a couple of people. Please don't take offense, but just for the sake of not interfering with kind of the presentation, you're welcome to. I mean, I think especially given the size of the audience tonight, certainly welcome to kind of jump in with a question here and there, and we can kind of field those as they come up. But if you're not speaking, please do keep your computers on mute. So yeah, just to echo what Chuck said, just welcome everybody. Appreciate you spending your time with us tonight. I guess I don't think I realized when we did schedule this, it was going to be the cutting into the first game of the World Series. So maybe that's part of the reason for the turnout, but good thing we're recording this and other people will be able to watch it kind of on demand. So just at a high level, we'll be going through the survey results from the previous town hall meeting, and then we'll be getting into the presentation, kind of where we're at with concept development, and then opening it up a little bit more for a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So I imagine most people attending this are familiar with the Ripavilla estate and historic Ripavilla. Just for the sake of giving everybody an overview, it's easily one of the most iconic assets of the city of Spring Hill. It's a great platform for telling stories of people and events that shaped the history of Spring Hill, but also Murray County and even the nation as a whole. The property has transitioned in ownership in several different families. I think most notably the Chairs family, but it has continued to evolve over time, and through ownership, but also through the development of that property itself. Most people would know that there's many rich and layered stories that are currently interpreted and told throughout the property. But there's also continue to be more opportunities to expand on those. We are still kind of learning about those on a day-to-day basis. As far as activities on site, there's a variety of experiences available to visitors, guided tours, just walking the grounds, seeing various historic outbuildings, but of course, also the private and community events that happen on a fairly regular basis. So just getting to kind of what our role is as the consultant team, the master planning team, we were hired by the city of Spring Hill. It is the city that owns and maintains Ripavilla. There is a nonprofit, Ripavilla Inc. It's been integral into the development, interpretation, and everything that you see going on the property currently. But we're hired directly by the city with emphasis on these key items that are listed on the slide right now. So different eras in time that Ripavilla developed under, and unique cultural contributions of the property, which include the architecture of Ripavilla, its place in Civil War history, the lives and contributions of those that were enslaved at Ripavilla, and its place in the agricultural history of the U.S. And so here at the bottom, you'll also see generally the timeline, and we're kind of right in the middle of our process in this concept development phase. And so this is, like Chuck said, the second of 3 town halls. We'll have another during this final draft concept presentation. And that will likely occur in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So initially, sorry, excuse me. The prior phase was the visioning phase, where we engaged through our initial town hall and followed up with a survey. The intent of kind of envisioning the possibilities and gauging what each of the participants and stakeholders found desirable for the property. So I won't go through all this in detail, but there are 4 primary questions that we asked, and the first dealing with the current programming and events that occur at Ripavilla, and these slides will be posted to the city's website on the Ripavilla page following this, so you'll be able to view these kind of at your leisure in a little bit more detail. But the key takeaways here is generally participants found that live music events, historic tours, and what we're kind of lumping into family programming ranked the highest among those that took the survey. You'll see that private events and some other more niche events ranked a little bit lower on the results, but I think that is a little bit to be expected with those not being open or quite as appealing to a larger audience. The second question that we went through was looking more at potential future programming on the site, engaging people's, how it impacted their willingness or interest to visit the property. Ranked at the top of the list were festivals, crafts and art fairs, and again, kind of what we're calling family-friendly programming. I think just generally you'll see that there's a larger desire for those adult and family-based social events, but also a little bit of focus on seasonal programming. The third question had more to do with additions to the built environment. And I think good, in general, a good takeaway here is that it seems that the community and stakeholders' priorities align well with what we've been handed by the city as far as areas to focus. There's a strong support for the preservation of the existing and educational uses. Also, support for structures that might better support that tour experience and or events that can occur on the property. And then just generally less favorable were ideas around new uses or structures that may not already exist on the property. And then finally, that last of the 4 questions had then to deal with the what additions to the landscape or grounds would have the greatest impact on people's willingness to visit the site. And just here to us, the key takeaway is, people are interested in additions to wayfinding on the site, increased beautification of the property, and an increased ability to just explore the entire site. So that's generally summarizing the survey results. There were a number of other, just discussion topics from Town Hall 1, but kind of jumping into our concept development. This slide was repurposed from our last town hall, but it's just, again, just trying to orient folks attending tonight and understanding exactly where Ripavilla is within the context of Spring Hill. you know, just down Highway 31 from the end of Saturn Parkway. It's a roughly almost 100-acre property. It does have conservation easements overlaid on it, which has specific limitations to the development of the property. And we can kind of go into those a little bit more as we talk through the concepts, but that's an important thing to keep in consideration. And so this is kind of really the first slide of several or many, I guess, tonight of kind of a starting point for how we looked at the property. And initially, we're looking at what buildings contribute historically or significantly to the history of the property, and how are spaces and buildings or structures currently being used on the property for events or tours or other types of programming. And as part of this initial phase, Phil Thomason, our preservation consultant on the team, has gone through and done an existing conditions assessment. I'll let him jump in and give any kind of high-level takeaways or recommendations that have been part of that.
Okay, thanks, Josh. At Ripavilla, we really have two concentrations of historic properties. One is the house itself and the outbuildings that are still around the house close to the highway, and then the agricultural buildings that are kind of at the back of the property. So the house itself is a two-story brick dwelling constructed in two major phases. First phase was begun in 1852, and this dwelling was built while they were working on the main house. And so a separate kitchen and smokehouse was also completed to the east of the original house. And then completed in 1855 was the main section in the Greek Revival style, with the two-story Doric portico on the north facade. And this configuration of Ripavilla continued to about 1920. In 1920, the house and the property was sold to John and Pearl Whitfield. And then between 1920 and 25, they did extensive remodeling on the house, especially on the interior. So, but the house is in really good condition. No real major situations with its integrity or condition. To the east of the house is a brick garage constructed in 1914, and that continues to be in good condition and used as a gift shop. To the south of the house is the stock barn, also referred to as an 1855 barn. And the main section appears to be built about 1855, and then it got kind of re-sided and enlarged around 1930 during a period of agricultural expansion at the property. Behind the barn area is the Freedmen's School, and that's basically a kind of like a living history exhibit that was moved onto the property in 1993. It was not really historically associated with Ripavilla, but came from some nearby properties and used again as interpretation of a Freedmen's Bureau School, which would have been built after the Civil War. There's also a little pump house to the southwest of the house, and again, just built next to the spring that's down in that area, and we think that was probably added by the Whitfields in the 1920s. So those are really the remaining outbuildings around the house itself. At the back of the property, there used to be at least about a dozen to 15 buildings and structures. These include barns, spring house, you had grain silos, dairy barn. So you had a lot of different buildings back there. Unfortunately, many of those have been lost, and so we really only have about three existing structures. One is what we call the event barn or the mule barn, and that's about circa 1950, just a rectangular plan barn that's been enlarged in recent years. There's a little shop building that's a concrete block built also circa 1950. But the most important building that we've got back there is the enslaved persons dwelling, also known as the tenant house. And after we've done some more research and work on it, that really does look like it predates the Civil War and was one of at least 4 to 6 tenant houses, well, slave buildings and tenant houses that we had back there. And so this was known as the quarters. It was sort of like this area for the slaves, and then later after the Civil War during Reconstruction, and later tenant houses for the farm workers. As late as the 1980s, there were still 2 buildings back there, one of which we call the Overseer's House, but we lost that one. So we're really just down to this one building back in the agricultural area that goes back to the pre-Civil War days. There's also another one of these living history properties built around 1985, and that's what is thought to be a sort of a reconstruction of Brown's Stand, an inn that would have been on the McCutcheon Trace, which is a little bit further to the east. But again, it's just part of a living history exhibit that was constructed in the 80s. So beyond that, the other properties we've got back in that area, again, of course, are the historic cemeteries. And then there's a historic roadbed that goes through that section also that could be interpreted. So those are the major historic properties, and we did a conditions assessment. And there's some work, stabilization, I believe is certainly planned now for the enslaved persons dwelling that's back there.
Thank you, Phil. So, just as another high-level takeaway, I mean, the building is kind of shaded and highlighted in yellow here. I think first and foremost, preservation and stabilizing of those buildings is the priority in this plan, and then looking after that, the education and financial stability of the property are secondary, but obviously still very important to the plan. So next, layering upon that existing plan, we have this interpretive concept plan, and it's really delving into the different zones for different interpretation, different types of interpretation, but also looking at the property and dividing it a little bit up into different, what I'll call character areas. At this point, I'll yield the floor to Carolyn Tate, who is our interpretive consultant, for her to talk a little bit more about some of her initial recommendations.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming in, and thanks for inviting us to be a part of this. From a real high level look, I think that collectively we think that we would love to take a little bit of the heat off the beautiful mansion and interpret the entire 98 acres. So just for the sake of sorting out history without having written a storyline, we look at that zone 1 is really where we talk about architecture and the family history. And then we look at the big zone 2, and we will study agriculture and farming history and have that as sort of an outdoor space for public gatherings. And zone 3, we look specifically at plantation life and enslaved people and the farming and livestock industries of the use over time. Part of what we're also recommending, or at least at this point we'd love to discuss, is connecting all 3 zones through some pretty aggressive trails and walkings, but also I would love to see a new interpretive center back somewhere in zone 2 that connects zone 1, 2, and 3. That would allow us, I think, an appropriate place to put electronic interactives in there to deal with all the different layers of history. And I think also, well, again, we take the burden right now, everything, all the commerce happens up in the retail operation in the store. So looking far down the pike, I would love to see a new building in there that connects all three properties. And that would sort of be the hub of retail and offer some other event space and limited retail. Now we can kind of go on ad nauseum about those things. If you're interested in the Q&A, please ask. But again, I think that as a community asset, primarily all the activity is up around the mansion in Zone 1. So I let my team members come in and talk about different ways of connecting the properties and adding different event space. But we're listening to everything that you're saying. Number one is historic preservation and educational use for this property. And then again, we look toward the future of connecting it and making it open to not just history buffs, but to families and the community and different demographics. So nothing that I have said is set in stone. I certainly don't speak unilaterally, but those are first top level thoughts about the entire property. And Josh, I can leave that back to y'all unless you want me to talk more about it. I know there are many fine opinions here, and I don't want to take too long.
No, that's great. And like you said, I think we can delve into that more during the Q&A. But I think as we zoom in on these on these zones, there's some more high level recommendations and kind of graphics that are associated with what you're saying. So that's helpful. But I think that's a good setup for Edward Henley to jump in with pillars development. He's again, kind of rounding out the team with the market and use assessment and kind of talking to some of these points here about connectivity and some other recommendations. So Ed, with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. And I'll definitely be building on both what you, Philip, and Carolyn have mentioned this evening. Taking a look and starting where Carolyn left off with the three different distinctive zones that have kind of emerged as we've assessed the site. Our concept and our concept plan from our assessment from Ripavilla site, as well as other locations that have similar characteristics and potential as we see it. A few key things arose, and they're seen as, of course, taking a step beyond preservation, which we know is paramount. But in doing so, placing an emphasis on beautification. You can see in the notes there the expansion of infrastructure and connectivity, and really it's working to make the built environment of Ripavilla align with those rich stories and with the interpretive plan, as Carolyn mentioned. When we think of beautification, really easily and simply put, we're thinking about the landscaping and the gardens, the importance that the grounds will play on perception and attractiveness for events is going to be critical. And also, this provides a greater possibility for event activation in other areas that even Ripavilla to this point may have not recognized, just because those areas don't have a natural draw or a natural appeal, just because they've yet to be activated with some type of greenery, some type of accent or structure, or just a trailway that allows people to get there easily. And building on that, we think about infrastructure piece. Which is a little more, I like to say, physical objects and items that you touch, less so than the living environment with landscaping and grounds. But definitely thinking about wayfinding, signage, and then those trails that we've mentioned before. Really creating an experience. We want something that establishes a sense of place, as well as improves functionality. Areas seen as destinations throughout the site, right? This is 98 acres, nearly 100 acres. And as Carolyn mentioned, the core, about 90% or so of the activity is all taking place within, relatively an acre or two on the site, that's really doing a disservice to the rest of the site. And we want to look at how we can really activate that and enriching that experience for the patrons. The other things that I think of and that we're talking about, these relate heavily to the feedback that we got from the survey, not just looking at other estates, but the feedback from the survey, which is really, you get a sense of others wanting to amplify and utilize the space and the grounds better. When you look at zone 2 and zone 3, those are areas that have a lot of natural green space. Topography on zone 2 is flat for a great extent, allowing for a lot of different types of activities that can take place. And then in zone 3, you have a different type of topography and scenery, which makes you much more appreciative of the nature, the stream, and different types of natural features there. And when you think of all those things bundled together, and wanting to further activate the space, I think it's important that we identify these destinations and we make sure that we're thinking about functionality. And so suitable and respectable parking areas designated to service those types of events in a practical way. You'll see some of those called out here on this diagram. But ultimately, it's about the connectivity. It's about really taking both the trails and the paths and the roads internal to the site, and doing that in a way that it improves the function, practically for visitors, but also for operations, providing ease of access. And then of course, you just want people to be able to traverse all these different areas of interest without fatigue, without really tiring, and then also having an expectation when we talk about signage and wayfinding of there's something greater to come, right? There's a reason that I'm venturing this far into the campus and the estate, and it has something really special for me, right? When I get back there, and you can do that through wayfinding and signage to really build a great case for the entire site. Also thinking about the connectivity in the grander scheme, not just internal to this site, but thinking about that as a larger network of mobility. We think about Spring Hill, you look at other studies, the Greenway Plan, Ripavilla is mentioned and seen as a great amenity to the community. And I feel like with the estate as a whole becomes more synergistic and pleasurable, that's great. But what you really want to do is make it a greater, more solidified terminal for Ripavilla, for Spring Hill with Ripavilla, people coming here and it being a place where they can spend a lot of time and think about where they go next, but then also a landmark for those people who are Spring Hill residents, and seeing it as somewhere they can traverse. And so you do have shown here on this diagram potential trailheads and connectivity that will bring people to and through the Ripavilla site. So with those greater uses, and as they spread across the site, you have some clear distinctions and desires of programming that develop. Those help with fundraising initiatives, which is a critical piece, of course. I think it goes without saying, but I still want to emphasize it, that the appeal and appropriately amenitized spaces draw far more use and make it far easier to monetize these 98 acres that we have at our luxury, right, to program. I want to make sure that we communicate that outwardly, that while things aren't set in stone, as Carolyn said, we are excited about the opportunities that are presented at Ripavilla. When you're there and you walk and you take in all 98 acres, when you step outside of the mansion, while it is magnificent, you realize that there's a lot that can be done. And I think that's the beauty of what we have in front of us with this master plan. So I'll turn it back over to Josh. Of course, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer. But I believe he's going to drill down further on kind of a zone by zone, highlighting how this can potentially progress, and that scale of progression might take place.
Thank you, Ed. You're exactly right. It's almost like you've seen this presentation before. So yeah, from here, we go into a little bit more detail on each of the 3 zones. We'll spend the most time just going through this zone 1, the front property, and again, looking at historic families and prior owners of the property, the architectural histories, and just kind of starting with this base, zoom in base of the historically significant areas and kind of how the site's currently being used. I won't go into a ton of detail on that right now, just for the sake of time. But just, you know, as we go through each zone, just understand that we're kind of starting with a as is, you know, different types of programming on the site, and kind of developing some recommendations as we go through this. And I'll kind of be jumping back and forth with Gary Bogren from KVD, our landscape architect, on this. And so he'll talk initially about this front zone 1 and some thoughts on generally just additions to the landscape, beautification, and infrastructure in the zone 1. Gary.
Hey, Josh, thank you. My name is Gary Vogren. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Just want to really build off the things that you've heard from Ed and Carolyn and Josh. And it really comes down to what we've learned over these past days of our life, that how impactful and important outdoor amenities are. Being outdoors, parks, historic sites, just being outside, seeing amenities, activities, and trails, and really building off the historic nature of the estate, and really amplifying the festival uses, family nights, seasonal events, getting people outdoors, synergizing this place, energizing, like Ed said, getting this thing more than just the historic campus and house, but make it much more interactive. And as we look at this master plan as part of the team, we're looking for the lay of the land, how this thing sits on the site, the edges, the interior organization of the 3 zones. As Ed had mentioned, we've got the strong historic element up front, the seasonal elements in the middle for the agricultural theme, and the background history for the agricultural in the middle room, and the back end with the natural topography, vegetation. But looking at the front portion of the campus and the estate is really, how do we kind of celebrate the entry along Main Street? We love the serenity and the simpleness and the cleanliness of the estate lawn, fronting Main Street, and the prominence of the main estate. We'd like to enhance those edges along Main Street and the entry drives coming in. Maybe there's some identification of street tree program, like frame that edge in, give it a perimeter, a statement at the streetscape, amplify the event lawn where the oval of the existing boxwoods are. It's a great event space for weddings, outdoor event venues, social gatherings. And also, as Ed had mentioned and Carolyn, was wayfinding and signage. Make it very clear that you have arrived something special. You're using that existing oval as a centerpiece, but how can you enhance that frontage? And maybe there's a gate there that showed the old entrance as it used to be coming in the straightward to the house. Maybe there's a perimeter fencing or wall along Main Street that ties into the boulevard as you come in, but also enhancing the boulevard. Right now it's currently gravel. Maybe that goes to a softer drivable surface that's a lot more permeable and not so much dusty. Enhance the landscape, improve signage and wayfinding, as Ed had mentioned, connectivity, and make the circulation clean. And then in the green zone around the estate is just kind of enhancing the existing gardens, bringing it back to the period history as best we can. We've taken the tour, talking to a lot of people. How do we bring back some of those gardens, some of the historic? There's a grape arbor that was out there as part of the carriage house entry along the boulevard. Just really enhance those outdoor experiences adjacent to home and really amplify that. And then looking towards the large event Raymond Amphitheater, build off that space, give it a backdrop, add some landscape to it, maybe resculpt the area to really enhance the festivities that could happen there and generate some excitement, and really create that outdoor experience and outdoor rooms as part of the estate that you can walk through, outdoor trails, connect to the different portions of the site, new activities for these enhanced building locations and potential additional buildings, and really tie all these elements together in an outdoor experience that you're both engaged internally, externally, as part of the tour and walking trail system. So, thank you, Josh.
You're muted, Josh.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Gary. Sorry about that. So we got 2 more slides that focus in on zone 1, and they have a little bit more to do with with a kind of initial approach to the built environment in zone 1 and kind of a second phase to what that could become. And kind of touches on a little bit of what Carolyn was mentioning with this idea of, well, I'll say that for a second. The kind of the first recommendation we have here is some upgrades and kind of cleaning up of the event barn or stock barn that's currently the 1855 stock barn, but having that upgraded to better facilitate event uses that are currently happening at the front of the property. And just for lack of a better description, kind of acting as a permanent tent structure, a shelter for outdoor events that are happening both at the amphitheater, but also around the mansion, so that it can become that, that indoor-outdoor kind of complement to those outdoor functions, but then also can have some internal upgrades that would allow it to, provide support for restroom concessions, activities related to the amphitheater. And then the second to this is related to the interpretive ideas that Carolyn had mentioned, and that is really focusing on a location, a central location. We've talked about how each zone can kind of focus a little bit independently on some of the parts of the interpretive, the history, the different stories associated with Ripavilla. Some areas, these 3 zones are each better suited to kind of talk to one versus the other, but identifying a central place that takes the burden off of the mansion to do so. And so that initially we see the Eichert Center as being a kind of area to better utilize an existing building on the property that can, as Carolyn was saying, be that central interpretive location where you can tell the entirety of Ripavilla's story in a central location with interactive technology and kind of a cohesive timeline where you don't really have to skip around so much and jump from period to period. Jump back and forth from period to period, but be able to tell a cohesive story here, and it becomes the center of operations, a location where visitors come and get the full kind of broad overview, but then are able to choose, what different tour offerings to different parts of the property they may be most interested in or best aligned with their interests from there. So we see the Eichert Center as being a possibility for an initial phase related to that. But then as Carolyn had mentioned, the idea around the possibility of building a new structure, a new building on the property that becomes more contemporary, well, not contemporary in terms of design, but just in terms of the infrastructure and technology, that it would be a facility that can house a number of exhibits and artifacts in the way that they should be preserved, but also that location that then in that phase 2 would tell that centralized story and be that kind of center of operations for the entire site. And again, having that transition more toward closer to the mansion and some of these other outdoor activities and programmed uses can better serve as a complement. And then as part of that, as we see that kind of expanding the horizon of kind of how the flexibility of different areas and uses on the property and kind of maximizing the potential of that, we would see the need for just some expanded, increased permeable parking in this zone 1. And then finally, that then opens up the Eichert Center to become a location for community partner, continue as a kind of complementary use or event space that It then, relates more to this Zone 2 kind of community-focused events and activities. So then we jump to phase 2. This doesn't have quite as much of a phase layer approach because it is mostly open space. And I'll let Gary talk a little bit more about some ideas how we can envision using these.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's really how do we envision this interior room, so to speak, between the front edge of the main estate and the back edge of the vegetation with some topography and some streams. And looking at the lay of the land, this is very flat, very gentle. We've got a couple of blue line streams kind of bisecting the sites, creates these rooms. But a lot of this was agricultural based in the history of the estate, and it's been used over time for baseball fields, outdoor seasonal activities, overflow parking, a maze. So just really building off those things and adding to those special events that we've talked about that really energize the estate as a whole, in addition to the historic aspect of it. But bring that history back in terms of this was agricultural. It had some history as part of the overall estate, but also use it as multifunctional for seasonal events and opportunities, and just build off generating some more revenue as part of the overall campus estate. So, sharing with the baseball fields, maybe there's other outdoor sporting events and opportunities that could be kind of re-engaged as the plan develops. And as people start to realize the value and benefit of having an outdoor space like this in the city core that's similar to a park, very active in terms of walkable trails, natural scenery. But we also want to be, look at the edges of the site as well. We know we have perimeter drives that take you back to the site, but we know that we're sitting in an area that's been not much developed other than the senior housing to the east of us. But we want to make sure these edges are contained, keeping natural vegetation, buffering where we need to, but increasing potential walkability and activity in the central room.
Thank you, Gary. And so from here, we move over to Zone 3, and just to kind of reorient you, this slide is turned 90 degrees, so you kind of have a key plan over here at the top left. North would be to the left of the screen, so that main drive coming into the rear of the property is now located over here on this left third, and kind of driving straight back towards the mule barn. And again, this initial slide is really showing, highlighting the historically significant structures back here on the rear of the property. And as Phil had mentioned, there was a large stock farm that operated back here in this kind of northeastern quadrant by PD Houston in their early to mid 1900s. But so we see opportunities there to kind of expand on that storyline, but also opportunities to look at the story of slavery at enslaved people at Rippavilla, and really there was a network of 6 or so quarters that ran the length of here. So there's opportunities for interpretation there and kind of expansion of that. I think the key component there is kind of building up the infrastructure a little bit, to whether it's through trails or safe access, so that people are able to conveniently visit this area of the property. So just some initial. I mean, this is heavily wooded in most of this area of the property. I think we see the need to develop some landscape buffers around the perimeter here, just as Gary was talking about on that Zone 2, to kind of control some views to some of this current and future development that can happen on the adjacent properties, to better kind of contain that setting in context. And then beyond that, where we see this ability to talk more about the story of slavery with the enslaved people's dwelling, having a better area with improved landscaping and some seating somewhere that almost has a little bit of a respite in all of this trails and circulation for increased interpretive signage on the on the trails and kind of within this area, but really a point for reflection and kind of a little bit more place to kind of contemplate and learn more about that story.
And Josh, what's unique about this, even though it's to the rear of the property, it's more remote, so to speak, in terms of off of Main Street, but the beauty of it is it's got great lay of the land, great tree cover. It's adjacent to residential neighborhood, but it also ties to the potential trails network for the city. So getting back here ties to that trail system that goes back to Southern Springs community, which is a benefit. So I see some interactive elements between the people who live there that can walk to this as almost adjacent park, basically enjoy that trail system. But as you mentioned, security is an issue, and that's always something we need to think about. It's somewhat remote, as I mentioned, but you can see that white line and trail that creates that loop within this system. But we want to make sure it has that comfortable feel, that you have, maybe there's call boxes, there's some ancillary lighting, potentially very limited, but through the day's hours, but creating an environment that is adjacent. This community has trail opportunities and connects to the overall trail system of the city.
Those are great points to add. And then, finally looking again back in this third layer of the built environment, and if there is expanded access created and better support for just general accessibility and safety back here, and security, ideas on how modifications could occur or upgrades to some of these agricultural buildings, the mule barn, but also the shop that was back here, and how could the shop potentially support visitors that are making their way around here. Again, kind of whether it's just house restrooms and water fountain and things like that, but then also looking at the mule barn as a potential space that is there a community partner. We've heard of other groups that are interested in partnering on the structure, and I think there are opportunities back here for a complementary use that could have ties to education and agricultural backgrounds, and so there could be a learning collaboration component that takes place back here that better supports the network of other items that get built out. Of course, we're limited to constructing anything new in this building envelope, but like I said previously, there was a large complex of farm support structure and livestock support structures that previously existed back here, and there are a lot of opportunities to kind of tell that story and kind of signal whether it's kind of placeholders in the landscape or wayfinding and signage to show historically what used to exist back here. And so, I mean, that's kind of diving into each area and then zooming back out. This generally has everything that we just went through overlaid back on the entire view of the property. And we'll just real quickly, just to touch on next steps, and before we jump into the Q&A, there's still plenty of work to do. These are preliminary recommendations. We're looking for input on them from the community and stakeholders. Our next step will be to take that input, and revisit these concepts, and develop the draft plan. We also have team members that are going to look at the cost and revenue analysis, and what the trade-offs are of improvements versus increased revenue, but also looking at all funding sources, starting with that increased revenue, but also looking at opportunities for donors, but also grants, as Ed had mentioned. And then, along with that, kind of hand in hand is phasing, and how do you match up expenses with revenue. And then, with these new uses or new areas of infrastructure, how do you manage and maintain those? And just looking at the overall structure of how the site is managed, and who kind of is best suited to just for example, some of these agricultural fields, a lot of that's kind of outsourced, and or not outsourced, but there's an agreement on some of the agricultural fields that exist today that is kind of a partnership. So there could be new partnerships that form, and kind of collaborations that could occur on the site. So we'll be exploring those as well. And we do have another survey opportunity for everybody, those that are attending, virtually right now, but also those that may be following up and watching this recording, or viewing the presentation on the city's website. We do have a number of kind of just front-end demographic questions, and just gauging people's individual engagement currently with Ripavilla, but there's also, again, kind of some mainly for questions where we're interested in getting some direct comprehensive feedback. So generally, just going over these real quick, we're interested in learning just on an individual basis where people's interests may lie, based on how zones 1 through 3 were presented. What area would you be most interested in visiting and kind of learning more about? Second, which recommendations or improvements do you feel should be implemented first? That's generally more of a little bit of a phasing question, trying to get the community and stakeholders' input or thoughts, desires from a phasing standpoint. Of course, all the numbers still have to work, but we feel like that feedback could be valuable. And then these next two are a little bit more narrowed in, but also open-ended, I guess, in how we're soliciting feedback. What elements are currently included in the concept plans, but which of those do you feel may not be adding value or increasing your likelihood to visit? And then second, what elements do you feel may be currently missing from the concept plans? So that the link to this survey will be posted on the Ripavilla project page, master plan page on the city's website, but it's also included in this presentation here. So with that, we'll open the floor up. I think, I guess we have a couple. Let me go ahead, and there's a couple other people currently in the attendees list that I'm going to promote real quick. And so I guess at this point, you're welcome to maybe either raise your hand, which there's a function built into here that will help raise you to the top of the list in what we're viewing here, and we could go ahead and queue you up for a question. Of course, you could always do it the old-fashioned way and just unmute yourself and jump in and ask.
Josh, I have a question. This is Victor Lay.
Hi, Victor. Yeah, go ahead.
So in listening to the descriptions about the different zones, and while it was mentioned a couple of times about possibly adding some new structures, new buildings or functions, or I think Gary had mentioned about resculpting some of the land in order for it to work a little bit better. how does all of that work with the conservation easement that sits on the property outside of certain sections to where we're not supposed to be disturbing that land?
Excuse me. So let me go ahead and just go back to an overview slide. No, let me go back to this one. So you can see the building envelopes. Building envelope A is this L-shaped perimeter in zone 1, and then there's this kind of rectangular shape in zone 3, and those are areas that the conservation easement allows for the addition of new structures, new buildings, also the addition of permeable paving for parking. Outside of those envelopes, you're pretty much prohibited from building anything that would require a foundation. And so that's kind of the main distinction that conservation easement makes. From a landscaping standpoint, I'm not aware of anything that prohibits the addition of plantings. From a regrading standpoint, I don't know that there's anything that we're suggesting here, other than maybe where we're showing some parking areas where there might be some grading associated with it. The important thing to point out there is would be some heavy archaeological concerns associated with disturbing the existing site. So any area where we would propose a new building or where there might be some changes in grading, the first recommendation would be to do an archaeological investigation report and make sure that what comes out of that is completed prior to any of that disturbance.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like Alderman Neves has, let me see, hand raised. Let me try to unmute. Alderman Neves, I think you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Even turn your video on if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'd rather not turn my video on. Yeah, just thank you guys so much for the meeting here this evening. I came in just a little bit late, but I was at the last meeting as well. And I have a couple things I'd really like to share. I don't mean any of these things to be taken as any kind of a criticism. They're just my thoughts, and I kind of expressed some of this at the last meeting, but I'm hearing a lot of things about new infrastructure and beautification and all those things, and I think that that's great, but I don't think that that's truly what's going to get people to be supportive to ensure the viability and the sustainability of Ripavilla so that it can survive and thrive and be here for generations to come. And the reason I say that, because if that was the issue, we could have done that a long time ago. And there have been a lot of things that have been already, addressed to try to make the property more user-friendly and beautification. But, my question, looking at it really from a marketing perspective, is what sets Ripavilla apart? What does it have that makes people want to go and visit it and support it financially? because that's the bottom line here. Grants are great, but everybody's after grants. Sponsorships are important, but I know from just my own line of business that sponsorships are difficult today. That's why nonprofits are having such a very hard time. But I'm looking at what is it that this property has, what's about it that really we should be focused on to ensure and enhance that gets the results that we're looking for here. You know, and so one of the things that I am not hearing much about, and I really think it should be taken in consideration, especially for a master plan, and that is that the Ripavilla is not just the story about the Civil War. You know, what about, you know, all the periods up until now, up until right now? I mean, after the war, there was the Reconstruction era, the feminism era, the happy 90s, the progressive era, World War I, Prohibition, and those kinds of things. And Ripavilla was still an active story that was developing all through those periods of time. And I don't hear anything about the importance of that and how it fit into making Spring Hill who it is, because it has a very rich history, and it is a cornerstone to the other plantations and historical properties in the area that made that all connect and made Spring Hill what it was and who it is today. And I don't hear the holistic story of Ripavilla, Spring Hill, and Murray County. Rather, I hear events that are more like park and recreation type things that you can find really anywhere. No places like Ripavilla. It has its own story, and it should have events that are living programming to tell that story and connect it to Spring Hill. It's not a standalone. It should be something that has many facets to tell those stories throughout the eras that Ripavilla has been standing and has been a living, live, like I said, cornerstone for this area. New structures and buildings are, you know, that's great, but that's not what really connects the hearts to me, to our area citizens and tourists, because we've already got some fantastic buildings there right now with incredible stories right now. It's the experience. It's the ability to connect people's hearts with what this property has been and still is for the entire story for us, for our area. And so I'm thinking that, you know, some of the questions on the surveys they're good questions, but I think they limit the vision of response or people's response, because they're pretty much focused a lot on events and, you know, what people want to do out there. They're not talking though much about the kinds of things I've just mentioned. Because
can I step in for a second? Because I think, and maybe this at the beginning of our presentation.
Can I just finish real quick?
Oh, yeah.
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 So at the very first meeting, I had expressed that what is really a shame to me is that the majority of folks in our area have never even set foot on Ripavilla, and they live right here, don't know much about it. So I think that when the questions on the survey are put together, they should include some of these kinds of things to help people have a greater vision in how they answer them, because a lot of people really we're talking a lot about almost kind of comparative to park, to recreation. Not that recreation can't be a part of it. I'm not saying that, but that should not, to me, should not be the foundation for what our master plan is built on in order to ensure the success and the preservation of the history of Ripavilla and its future. So that's basically my input on it. And I'm not sure who that was speaking, but I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, this is Mary Ross-Tilley with Tuck Hinton. I think, and if it's not coming across in the presentation, what I want to make clear is as we talk about this as a team, and if we go back to the 3 slides at the very beginning, priority 1 was to look at the preservation and the historic assets that you have on the property. That is focused to those 98 acres. Let's make sure that we do everything we can to preserve those, understand the story behind them, validate the story, and tell that story of those things that, in a way, are the obvious things that you would talk about on the site. So that was making sure we understand and preserve what we have. The second slide was about the interpretive concept. How do you look at the entire site, not just that front piece of property, and expand the story to at least utilize the 100 acres? And so with that, of figuring out how you tell that story in a deeper way. Right now, a lot of the focus on the tour and at Ripavilla focuses on the Chairs family. And as we get into this more, we understand there's a lot, it's almost so much information and so many connections to different things that it's hard to put your hands around all of the things you could talk about related to Ripavilla. So our suggestion here was to create a location that we're calling the Interpretive Center, that place where you can continue to add information and stories and make connections with Spring Hill, with other battle sites or other entities and stories that is, and frankly, some of this is going to take time and money to be able to pull together those cohesive stories, but we see that this is evolving. And one of our recommendations that Carolyn Tate has talked about is actually look at the mission statement for Ripavilla. And right now the mission statement sort of focuses on the Chairs family and some other things, is to change that mission statement to be more inclusive and open to the possibilities of letting other stories in. So those are real important to us, and maybe we just touched on it too softly at the beginning. But the third thing, which is probably the one that what we're trying to do also with how do you monetize some of this, how do you create funding for people, exposure, bringing people here so they do step on the site. Maybe it's that they're connecting to a greenway or walking through the site. Maybe they're not coming there for an event, or they don't really care about history and old structures, but if they experience this property, there's going to be a place for them where it's special to them for a different reason than history. So we're trying to look at the stories and the way that you can connect with a bunch of different people. And then we are talking about events and other things that frankly are the money makers. It is being a museum, so to speak, and historic structures, that costs a lot of money. There need to be complementary things that can help provide the funding to keep up the assets. So those really, I think we're looking at 3 priorities, and if it's coming across more on us talking about the newer things, that you know, we need to make sure in the final recommendations and master plan that really those 3 objectives are important. And I think that interpretive center in looking at the site as a whole, and then how does Ripavilla tie into the bigger picture, and not limiting ourselves. We pointed out at the beginning, we were sort of given that as a starting point. At a minimum, you need to talk about these 4 areas and these 4 kind of key pillars. But we're just finding that the story just keeps expanding, and we're trying to provide that opportunity that you can continue to build on that, you know, years from now as you learn more things. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if Carolyn or Ed, if you want to speak to that more.
Let me just respond to you really quick, Mary.
Okay.
I mean, it really wasn't a question I was asking. I'm just giving my opinion and my observation. And I appreciate your response there. I still think, though, that foundationally, the issue is really how are we going to get people to support, to buy in and connect with the Ripavilla, because the historical aspect of Ripavilla is the #1 draw for people to come there. There's lots of places, even though Spring Hill needs more, but there's a lot of places people could walk trails and those kinds of things, the uniqueness about Ripavilla. So I just wanted to offer my opinions on some of the areas that I would really had hoped that you weave into this master plan, because the marketing, as you know, it has to come from this foundational piece of what is the end result we're looking for, and what is it that sets Ripavilla apart. And a lot of the things that they're doing out there now are some of the same things that are here. I mean, they have been doing those things. I think it just needs to go to a deeper level. And I appreciate the opportunity to express myself.
Yeah, thank you.
Hazel, this is Carolyn Tate, and thank you very much. You made some great points, and I don't disagree with a thing you said. I don't think anybody on the team does. And if I sort of soft pedaled my interest in bringing this historical property from the 1800s to present day, I take that. We really want to make Ripavilla a living historical asset, and we want to expand the demographics so that it's not only what happened on the battlefield, but why it still is. Why it's current today, and why it's important, why history is important to what happens to us today, that you look backwards. I think several of the other team members have talked very much about connectivity, and it's not just on the 100 acres, but it's also with the city and everything that happened around it. And Ripavilla, as you are well aware, was just at the epicenter of one of the most notable times in history. So I'm agreeing on all your things, on all your points, but I'm just saying that we take it out over the whole 100 acres, so we give people of every interest a time to come and learn this history through their own way, whether it be through architecture or through musical programs or sporting events or through nature trails, that we let people learn in their own way. It's sort of like taking a maker's environment where you come in and you interpret it in your own way. And that's what I think we're doing. Your points, though, are very well made, and wish everybody would be as vocal and specific about what their hopes are for the property.
Josh, this is Linda Harrison. May I say something?
I was muted. Yes, Linda, please go ahead.
One of the things that does indeed set Ripavilla apart from other places of historic significance is that the sight lines, when you stand on the property and look around, granted there's Saturn Parkway on that side, but you can't see it. General Motors did a great job of camouflaging themselves. So the sight line has been protected. It's almost as if the Chairs family were still there. What they're seeing is what they saw in the 1850s. And that's pretty unique to some historical sites, because communities just have encroached and gotten closer and closer, but we don't have a Domino's Pizza sign that we can see around us. That is huge attraction for me. We have witness trees that were there, that if they could talk, what a story they could tell. And those kinds of things, I think, help set Ripavilla apart. Certainly our stories and everything else and that you're addressing. But I wouldn't want to have that little factor overlooked. It ought to be treasured, and it is by me.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great point. And luckily, the Civil War Trust, the battlefield is in the Civil War Trust.
Yes, that helped.
EM's a supportive partner. I guess the property of the South is the Murray County Industrial Board. But so I'm not sure fully, all of their development plans there, but at least they seem like a willing partner that would kind of help be sensitive to those concerns.
Yes, we need to maintain and preserve that sense of place. Absolutely.
And I have a couple general comments. This is Alderman Fuqua here. Listening to some of the comments given this evening, I think we're very spot on from both sides, from my colleagues and board members of Ripavilla Inc. And, one of the things and the objectives with this, exercise here is that we grab all demographics and invite them to learn a little bit about Spring Hill, what kind of started it all, if you will. And what I'm seeing generally is that's being explored, and that is so important to me, mainly not from the political side of where I sit on a seat, but my wife and I, and my son, and family members travel across the country, especially the Southeast, and try to visit these special and unique places. And what's important to us is sometimes that history with it doesn't appeal to us, but there is something else, and that something else makes us connect with unique experiences. And when the big dresses or the Civil War costumes, just don't do it for us. There's always something else that grasps us. And I see this in Franklin, in exploring some of those sites, that there's a little more left to be desired with an experience. We do a ghost tour, and we stand on the sidewalk and we're staring at this old structure that has amazing history, and I'm a history buff, and I'm full in, but my wife isn't. And so with the master plan, my hope was to kind of draw that in to where, as a family, the experience is very, very well experienced throughout, rather than just being on my side of the history. So what I'm seeing is very positive, and it's been well executed. And kind of looking at the history of what you guys have done, it really makes me excited. So I appreciate it. And again, what I've heard, I think is very constructive and ought to be moved forward. But also, I don't want to neglect the fact and the goal of this project is to make this piece of property and the structures and that history kind of stand on its own, with its own bearings. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alderman Fuqua. Ed, that seems like just as good an opportunity to kind of, I feel like you can kind of talk to the layering of things a little bit. And you've talked to it in the past, but if now is a good opportunity just to kind of expand on that a little bit.
No, absolutely, Josh. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I think, and the graphic you're showing here, I think, is a really critical one to look at as we take account of the entirety of the site. I think the reason we, as a collective team, looked at these three distinct zones is largely because each one has something that honestly can be magical about it in its own right. And then, of course, it creates, this is all Ripavilla. And I think that's something to really tout. The brand of Ripavilla can and should grow. The experiences and the delight that visitors have at Ripavilla can and should grow. I think addressing some of the things that I've heard in the Q&A, I feel like, really expanding the demographic is key, especially when you think about this as it's a piece of property that's owned by the city. It's a public piece of property. There's, just having looked at other estates, other historical sites, other historical structures, other plantations that are telling the history agriculturally up until Civil War and the antebellum era. They operate in different capacities, and they honestly have different levels of success because of it. Some of what was being described earlier, where you have an exclusive focus on history and really wanting to be period specific or telling the story through periods. Those operate much more in a sense of having a land grant and being endowed, and then operating off of an endowment and very wealthy donors and funders, because then you're able to be much more explicit and much more siloed in what you offer. I believe it was just talked about. You're gonna capture the history buff, and you're gonna capture the person who's there for taking in period specific architecture or that type of experience. And if you aren't open to other things and you aren't crafting a greater offering, you're missing opportunities, but you're also missing the cross pollination, right, of people who have multiple interests, and you're bringing them all to your site to celebrate, whether it be at the same time or different times. And I think even some of the most well-known, most popular, most historic sites in the country, they've been forced to look at other types of ways to expand their offerings, largely because these structures are getting older, and the upkeep of them is not getting any cheaper. The site and maintenance and grounds, as much as you want to beautify them, they're continually growing expense. The wages for people who are providing the services continues to grow. And then we're growing a nation of people that have different interests. You have different waves and different generations that learn and absorb information and want to interact with things differently. I think that's part of what Carolyn is saying, is it's not that you're not telling or neglecting any story, but you have to definitely adapt and become more versatile in how you do that. And there's ample examples of how different institutions that are anchored by a historic mansion have many acres. They're taking it upon themselves to figure out what their next steps will be and what their master planning and strategies will be. And we're looking at those and rolling those in here because we feel that they're best practices, hoping that what we present is something that's captivating to a multitude of audiences. And of course, economically viable, feasible, and propels Ripavilla into a future that is sustainable.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I think that's helpful to add in. So, I don't know, did I see if anybody else? Okay, Alderman Kanapari, let's see, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm probably the last person to give an opinion on something this historic in the South, since I was born in Brooklyn, New York. But I know a little bit about marketing over the 45 years that I've been in private practice. And I want to get back to the idea of attracting people here. It's a city-owned property, and we're trying to make it self-sufficient. You guys did a great job, and I'll get into the fact that it might be too great a job, but you did a great job in kind of looking at the whole picture, the whole property, and this is a definite step forward as far as a master plan goes. You did a very professional job, but I guess it gets down to, I'm thinking that we're taking in so many of these things in the master plan that as far as marketing goes, to me anyway, my opinion is it's getting confused. I'm confused. What is Ripavilla? Okay, I've been here 3 years, and I've been there and I've toured it, and I'm thinking it's historical. Well, is it a city? Some people think it's a city park for the residents. Are we trying to attract visitors here because of its Civil War significance? Is it a venue to raise revenue, or maybe an architectural research kind of opportunity for those people. So what I'm thinking in terms, and I'm probably thinking out loud, is I think we're going off, the master plan should be listing these things, but I still think we're going off in too many directions for any one of those directions to succeed in the future. My thinking is that if I was doing a master plan, the report should start off with a statement such as, "This is Ripavilla," and explain why this is Ripavilla. We can market that after we do an analysis of cost, benefits, whatever, but we have to, I think we have to hone in on what is Ripavilla. It is many things, but shouldn't we pick out one of those things in the master plan and go after it? And then the rest of it will fall in. But right now, the way I see the plan is we're going off in so many directions. The plan is going off in so many directions that personally I find it confusing. But then again, I was born in Brooklyn. So that's my take on it.
Well, thank you. I understand. I understand what you're saying, and I think two things. A lot of this master planning and visioning exercises are at the beginning. They are about being kind of divergent. I mean, it's about going in all these directions, and getting all the possibilities out there, getting the feedback from all the stakeholders and the community. And this is kind of the point where we now start narrowing that focus back into a draft plan or a final plan. And some of that is informed by the financials and figuring out just the practical side of things. But I think the other part of that goes a little bit back to what Carolyn was saying earlier on with kind of the mission and vision for Ripavilla, and that there probably is. This could be a good point for just a little bit of a pause with engaging with Ripavilla to understand, what is the primary mission or vision there. Because Carolyn, you can share just from your experience at Country Music Hall of Fame. There was a focus on the history of country music and preserving it and telling that story. But there was all kinds of complementary uses that got built into the building and the foundation in general. That there were events and there may have been music there, but it wasn't focused on country music. But it was a way to better support the mission and vision. Those funding sources became avenues to provide that support. And Carolyn, you have a more eloquent way of saying that. But.
Well, maybe I do. Thank you, Alderman, for your comments. And I agree that this is a lot of information because you've got a huge team with a bunch of properties, and we're all pointing out our own areas of interest. I agree with you that our mission statement should be one of the first things that we talk about. And what I would do is keep it as simple as possible. I've studied a lot of mission statements over time, but I think that we always focus back on our mission to preserve, restore, and interpret the buildings and grounds. And we look at this as an historical property. And over those three zones, we're looking at different ways to interpret it. But I agree with you that it all starts with a mission statement. And I think the classic fundamental and educational historical aspect of the property is for us to stabilize it and keep it there forever. Now, I think that we expand on the different uses throughout the different zones, with some of it being in the mansion itself. And then we do look at present day and modern day uses as well. So your points are noted, and we I think that when we present some of our next statements, that we will keep in mind that we are promoting the mission statement and the focus of where we are.
And thank you, Caroline. This is John Canapari again. Thank you. It's funny that you said keep it simple, because in my notes here in front of me, I didn't want to say it out loud, but since you brought up simple, I have in my notes the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. And it's true. If we want to really, in my opinion, again, if we really want to attract people, we have to know what people we're after, and we have to know what our mission is. All of these supplemental and complementary uses for the property are great, but we have to come out in full force and say, hey, this is what Ripavilla is. And
I couldn't agree more. And I think that what you're hearing about are, again, we're trying to put a lot of ideas out there for a huge campus. And we don't want to leave ideas on the table. We don't want to leave money on the table anywhere. So we want to put them out there and explore them and get the community's comments. But I am a huge believer in one sentence being your mission statement. So everybody on the ground and everybody on the board and everybody on that land knows what their primary mission is. So your point is not lost on us.
And you did, I'll say it again, you guys did a great job in uncovering and exploring the uses that we have for that property. And that was a great job that you did. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Canapari. Do we have anybody else that has a comment or a question? Okay, that may be it for us then. I'll just add that, again, that this is going to be shared to the event page on the Ripavilla Master Plan page on the city's website. This recording will be posted afterwards. I believe the survey link should be live there as well, and that would run through the end of next week, as far as keeping that open and being able to complete that. So stay tuned for next steps. We do have one more town hall event coming up for the next phase of the master plan. Just look forward to incorporating everybody's comments, and I think this I was a little unsure with the number of attendees at first, but I think this turned out to be a great town hall. So thank you for everybody's participation. Appreciate everybody hanging in. I was a little long, so. Given that, I'll just say good night. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Hi, guys.
Have a good evening.